Hello. Hi, everybody. My name is Allison. I work here at KDHX. I'm the Chief Engagement Officer. I want to say thank you for coming here today. Thank you for braving the ice. We also have some people tuning in online, so I want to thank them as well and let them know that their comments and questions will be read here if they so wish. This is a really important conversation. I'm so glad that you made the time to be here. How many were at the last conversation? Pretty good amount. It's cool. Good retention rate. I like that. This is a partnership between KDHX and the St. Louis Blues Society. So I want to say thank you to Jeremy Siegelmoss and everybody at the Blues Society, as well as our team here at KDHX for making this happen. I'm going to bring Jeremy up, and he's going to introduce our moderator. But thank you to Dr. Roz and our panel today as well.
Thanks. How about a hand for Allison, everyone? And all of KDHX. We all love KDHX. They play more blues than any other station in St. Louis now, and that's awesome. So we're very happy about that. Again, I'm with the St. Louis Blues Society, and we are a member-based organization. So if you are not a member, see us afterwards. We have little forms in the back, and you could get the new compilation CD, which the last 2 years we've been the most played album on KDHX. So that's pretty great for everyone. We have some board members here, and we have some really great panelists. Sharon Foner has the flu today, so she won't be here. Just generally, this is a great conversation. Last week was outstanding. I think this week's going to be great. We have another one on the 25th with a bunch of our youngsters. And so if you have any comments or feedback, we'd like to hear that so we can continue this process as we go. At this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Roz, she's a great moderator, and she's one of my favorite people. So how about a hand for Dr. Roz?
Good afternoon. Thank you all very much for being here on this very cold day and, of course, enduring the icy road conditions. So I really appreciate you all coming this afternoon on the day of our second conversation, which deals with the present reality of blues music today. Before we bring up the panelists to the stage, I'd like to walk you through the order of today's conversation, okay? And that is that I will enlist you all as volunteer from the audience as participants to get you started right away to engage in our conversation. And I would do that by getting you to read aloud a couple of these slides that would have quotes. We have at least 2 quotes, and we also have maybe about 5 slides. Each would have a key term that's related to today's topic. Okay, and after we do that, then I usually like to do a quick, in this case, review or recap of what we discussed last week, okay, so that, again, we can make the connection and continue on this whole discussion about race and blues in St. Louis. So let's go ahead and let me go ahead and start by saying, today I hope you will speak truth to power, the power that race holds for blues music. To do this, let us be honest, respect different opinions, and learn from one another. Let us understand that dealing with the subject of race means we also need to talk about racism. And this can be difficult and discomforting for many of us. However, we need to address the elephant in the room in order to find ways to resolve the problems that racism has caused. Speaking truth to power means believing deeply in what you say and fighting every day to have that heard. It may not be popular. It means taking a risk. It means standing for something. As we think about cultural appropriation, which is going to be the underlying theme for our conversation series, let us reflect on this quote. And it's a quote from the film The Monuments Men, which was released in 2014. And it is, you can wipe out an entire generation. You can burn their homes to the ground, and somehow they'll still find their way back. But if you destroy their history, you destroy their achievements. And it's as if they never existed. And if you go back to that film, those of you who are familiar with that film, show of hand, anybody remember seeing The Monuments Men? It's a true experience from World War II, when American officers had to rescue and return art masterpieces stolen by Nazi thieves. There is another piece of culture, and I like to tie in theatrically when I think of a play that was written by actor, playwright Ozzie Davis, and the title of that play is an excerpt that I want to use to again set the tone for today, and that is from the play Pearly Victorious. In this excerpt, which I will now start, it says, our churches will say segregation is immoral because it makes perfectly wonderful people, white and black, do immoral things. Our courts would say segregation is illegal because it makes perfectly wonderful people, white and black, do illegal things. And finally, our theater would say segregation is ridiculous because it makes perfectly wonderful people, white and black, do ridiculous things. When reflecting on lessons from last week's first conversation, which was the past stigma of the blues, that took place here on this stage with Bernie Hayes, UV Hayes, Marsha Evans, and Jimmy Hines sitting right across from me, okay? Some of the things that we discussed was the stigma that's usually attached to the negative labeling and stereotypes that have already been perpetuated in our media, okay, in our political arena, and also affecting music. Music is a part of our culture, okay? And let us think about how those negative labeling and stereotypes dehumanizes people, okay? And how psychologically and socially, when you have that kind of influence over a people, and especially a people who have originated blues music, then it what? Sets up the stage for cultural appropriation. Okay, so when we think too about how last week's conversation would tie into this week, again, the underlying theme is to address the issue of cultural appropriation. In fact, that's one of the key terms that we'll probably bring up shortly. And as I think about how media and religion, which we also talked about last week, is one of the sources of some of the stigma, especially when you start thinking about blues music for sharecroppers coming from the South, it was considered the devil's music. So that was a stigma that followed those blues musicians in the context of the religion of the South, okay? And when we think too about the ongoing perpetuation of the negative images and stereotypes, again, I will go back to some of the films, and particularly in filmmaking history, one of the films that pop up in my mind is D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, which was released in 1915. Another one that is more in the latter part of the 20th century is the one called The Green Mile, okay, which deals with incarceration in as we say, unfair incarceration of black people, okay, and that was released in 1999. And one that was released right at the turn of the new century, and that was in 2000, was Bamboozle, which really got into the negative labeling and stereotypes of black people, okay? So again, something for us to start thinking about as we get into today's conversation, because I really want us to be very candid and be very open about how racism has affected not just our music, but specifically blues music. And when I think about that and getting us ready to shortly look at the different slides, I also think about a speech that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. actually delivered at Stanford University back in April of 1967. And that speech was entitled The Other America. And in that speech, he talks about the existence of a separate America, one for white people representing the dominant culture, and one for poor and people of color, especially black people who often live in degrading conditions. So when we think about how people have been labeled and stereotyped, how does that play into people perceiving them on a cultural basis, how important that is, when we start looking at race and its impact on the blues musicians who originated the music as black enslaved people of the South. Okay, so we need to keep that in mind. And then to summarize from last week's conversation, if people of a dominant culture degrades a culture unlike their own, how does that encourage cultural appropriation? How does it involve devaluing and discrediting the foundation of blues music that has been originated by black enslaved people? As an example, there is another article which we referred to as part of closing our conversation last week and will continue to be addressed as we go through this series, and that is White People, Blues Music, and the Problem of Cultural Appropriation, which has continued to create controversy even today, even though it was probably the article was written back in 2016. So let's go ahead and get started then with the slides. Okay, we'll start with, I need a couple of volunteers from the audience. And the first slide up, if I can please get someone to read this slide, which is a quote by James Weldon Johnson. Okay, I have a hand raised back here.
It is from the blues that all that may be called American music derives its most distinctive character. James Weldon Johnson.
Thank you. And of course, James Weldon Johnson is the person who composed Lift Every Voice and Sing, which is considered the Negro or Black national anthem. Let's go to the next quote, and may I please have another volunteer? From the audience, you all, let's get ready. I want you all to get involved. Let's get engaged. I see a hand up here in the back. I also see one in the front. Don't worry, we got a couple more slides coming up, okay?
You must respect what you come from. You must pay homage to it. You must analyze it. You must respect it and teach it to your young. Elma Lewis.
Elma Lewis was a Black female who immigrated from Barbados, and back around the early 1920s and 30s, she was one of the ones that advocated for the arts and music and dance in the inner city of Boston. Okay, so I thought that this particular quote will fit what we're talking about. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, may I have another volunteer for this one, please? Up front? Okay.
Tradition, an inherited, established, or customary pattern of thought, action, or behavior, such as a religious practice or a social custom, and the handing down of information, beliefs, and customs by word of mouth or by example from one generation to another without written instruction.
All right, thank you. Another volunteer, because we have another key term, please. Okay, someone over here. Bob, okay.
Value, the monetary worth of something, market price. A fair return or equivalent in goods, services, or money for something exchanged. Something, such as a principle or quality, intrinsically valuable or desirable.
All right, thank you. And let's bring up the next slide. May I have someone to volunteer and read this one? Okay, I see Alonzo's hand over here on the side.
Appropriation, an act or an instance of appropriating something. To take exclusive possession of, annex. To take or make use of without, to take or make use of without authority or right.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and I think we have this one. May I please have a volunteer to read? I see a gentleman's hand back here.
Plagiarize, to steal and pass off the ideas or words of another as one's own. To use another's production without crediting the source.
Okay. And do we have one last key term coming up? Yes. This one, please. I see a, is there someone that want to take this up? I see a hand right here up front, toward the middle.
Culture, the customary beliefs, social forms, and material traits of a racial, religious, or social group. Also, the characteristic features of every existence, such as diversions or a way of life, shared by people in a place or time, the set of values, conventions, or social practices associated with a particular field, activity, or societal characteristic.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, okay, just so you all can understand, the purpose of doing the quotes and the definitions is so that we can all be on the same page and understanding how these words will relate to what we're talking about today when we talk about the reality of what's happening with blues music here in our St. Louis community. So at this time, I am honored to bring to our stage each of today's three panelists, and to get started, Mr. Dion Brown. He is the former executive director of the B.B. King Museum and Delta Interpretive Center, and also the founding executive director of the National Blues Museum. Mr. Dion Brown. Our next distinguished panelist is Mr. Gene Dobbs Bradford. He is the president and CEO of Jazz St. Louis, and he's also the St. Louis Arts and Education Council 2018 honoree for excellence in the arts, and he's a blues musician, you all? All right. And of course, last but not least, this gentleman has been around St. Louis handling the business. And this is, of course, Mr. John May, General Manager, Special Events and Talent Coordinator at BB's Jazz, Blues, and Soups. Okay, let's get you all seated. I have a more informal type of process. So as I, explained to you all before the program began, and that is that I'll hit you all with a series of questions, and then, it's a conversation that first starts between you all or among you all there as panelists, and then we'll extend it to our audience participants and the participants who are following us on Facebook Live, okay? So let's get started with the fact that here's the series of questions for you all to entertain among yourselves and deal with. The first one is, how have people supported or not supported you and your particular venue as a business is in the way of promoting blues music? And so if you want, I think I will put, I know, Dion, I know you'll probably be dealing with it from the perspective of blues, but I know, Gene, you could probably deal with it from blues and jazz, and so can you, John May. So that's definitely something we want to look at. And then the next part of this is, what difficulties have you experienced personally and or professionally while working with blues music or blues musicians? I want you to think specifically about how does a lack of competitive compensation for blues artists tie into perceived value of blues music and those blues musicians. And of course, I want you to also think about how copyright laws help blues artists, or how have copyright laws served as roadblocks for blues musicians? For instance, when white rock and roll musicians borrow from blues musicians without crediting the source, is this a case of stealing blues music? Did you say borrow? I said borrowing, but then I went on and started saying, is that also a case of stealing blues music? So we need you all to help define that, because like I said, I'm not going to keep going back and forth with these questions. I'm going to put them out there and let you all sort of naturally take this and go with this. And of course, the last thing I want you to address and think about, and that is, how can someone invest in blues music without exploiting it? So I got you all started on some really heavy topics, okay? So we're gonna be looking at how can, we get competitive compensation for our blues musicians, and also what are some of the roadblocks when it comes to, dealing with copyright laws, and of course, just the whole overall perception of blues music and blues musicians. So it's on you all. Whoever wants to get started, it's up to you.
John's a veteran, so I'm gonna toss it over to John.
Okay, okay.
Talk about St. Louis.
Yeah, one of the issues we have in St. Louis is they use sports. Anybody will pay anything for a ticket to a sporting event. If you've got a big show at one of the big theaters, they'll pay anything up to $300-400 for a ticket of somebody who's far past their prime, just taking those last dollars. But when it comes to somebody who's been doing live music their entire life, going out and hustling to try and maybe get $5-10 per person to come out and pay their bills, doing their craft, which is blues or jazz. In this town, it's pretty much the same. It does cross over a lot. You can be gospel, blues, rhythm and blues, jazz, and everybody in this town kind of has a feel for it. But again, when it comes down to it, it's hard to get people to pay for St. Louis music. It's our indigenous music form, and I found that the city itself has not really promoted one of its best assets. But when it comes to sports, they'll march up and down, have parades, and pay big dollars, and kind of keep you away from where the music is, because the music isn't really where the money is. And that comes, it's probably all around the world, but specifically in St. Louis, when it comes to sports, they'll do anything. When it comes to music, it's secondary. And the history of this city is amazing musically. And as you brought up earlier, if you don't support it, it'll die. And we do it 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and do it as a kind of a family, a community. And it crosses racial borders, international, everything. And it's sad when you are here in St. Louis and you find people coming from Europe that know more about our city than the people that live in it. And they see it as a valuable asset. It's something that they don't have. And even though we have it here every day and they're completely surrounded by it, it's difficult to try and get people to come out and support it in the downtown area or anywhere, because the blues really has no known address. It's just here, and particularly in the city of St. Louis.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Gene.
Well, I've been thinking about the how this topic is very nice. The first panel makes a very nice segue to this panel, because you can't really talk about the support for the organizations that we have without talking about the value that people put on the blues in our society. And when you look at the history of jazz and blues in our country, as was brought up last week, there's always that sense that this is for the other. So yes, you'll have, back in the days of the Harlem Renaissance, you have a lot of white people coming to the jazz clubs, but that was sort of a subversive thing. So in a way, they're sort of getting validation for their hipness by participating in these activities that are somewhat verboten, and what that translates into today is that there's not a sense of the fact that jazz and blues are a part of our American culture, that they're cultural institutions that are worthy of support. I remember one of the things when I started working at Jazz St. Louis, we were actually called Jazz at the Bistro, which is the name of the concert series that we had. And we would go to the corporations here in St. Louis and we'd say, can you give us some support? And they would say, why would I support a jazz club? And other than the fact that we're presenting great American music, I mean, we actually needed to, the organization was doing a lot more than just presenting the music. We were actually educating students and doing a lot of the same activities that they're doing at the St. Louis Symphony, but the perception is that this isn't really valuable. That's one of the reasons why we changed the name of the organization to Jazz St. Louis, to help to clarify what it was that we did. And that's when we started to see a lot more progress in support. Basically what we're doing is trying to educate the St. Louis public about the fact that jazz is just as important a cultural institution in this community as an opera company or a ballet company or a symphony orchestra. And that's changing. That's something that's evolving. So you see now across the country, you've got organizations like Jazz at Lincoln Center. You've got organizations like SF Jazz, Manchester Craftsmen's Guild in Pittsburgh. These are organizations that are now cultural institutions that are doing this, like I say, the same activities that you'll see in any other cultural institution, but the perception is much different because we have to fight a lot more. There are plenty of foundations that are set up to support the traditional cultural institutions, like the ballet companies and the opera companies, because there's a tradition of giving. There's a tradition of the community saying, this is valuable for us to have in our community for these reasons. And now that's starting to shift somewhat, but it's going to be a long journey. And the tradition of looking at blues as a cultural institution, right, is really in its infancy, if you can even call it that. I mean, it's almost, I think, the thought of supporting blues as a cultural institution in this country, I think, is really at its very beginning, which presents a lot of challenges. So the value, I think that we do see some change in the way that people are looking at these institutions, but it's going to take a lot longer for us to really be, I think, and not just time, but also a lot of change in perceptions before we're going to be accepted as something that isn't just outside, something that you just go to have a drink and let off some steam and show everybody how cool you are or whatever, but to say that this is an important part of who we are as Americans.
That's deep. Can you rephrase that question? I didn't forget it after hearing John. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. You know, the blues has been around forever. You know, it's the bedrock of what we call American music. So anything you listen to, you can research it and track it back. And it's going back to the blues. St. Louis has, the music scene here is just so vibrant. To operate the Legends Room down at the National Blues Museum, I mean, we're selling out crowds. It's hard. And going back to John's point, people won't pay. And he's right. Sometimes not a lot, people come there and say, that's too much money. Mm-hmm. Well, I value it. And if I don't value it, you're not going to value it. So, yeah, that ticket is $10 and $15. You don't question when you go out to Six Flags. You don't question when you go pay for those $200 shoes. You don't question it. So you pay for what you value. But the people who do come to those shows, mm-hmm. they're incredibly impressed with not only the venue, but the artists that we have here in St. Louis playing. When it comes to contributions, there's a whole nother topic, because I can't speak for the bistro, the jazz next door, but what I can speak to is when you look at our numbers for this year, we bring in over 71.8, 72% off of earned income. Earned income is your admissions, your concerts, anything but fundraising. If we had that much fundraising, we would have no problems, but mm-hmm. there comes that community support, getting people out there, and it's more than just music. That music venue is such a small portion of what the National Blues Museum does, from traveling exhibits to the educational component to it. With our partnership with the Blues Society, we're doing building a kids band, which is we'll talk about later, is part of my vision of getting kids to keep on wanting to do the blues. Even if they don't do anything but come and listen and learn to play an instrument, they can go play anything, but it's still the blues is the bedrock of that. So what I say is I value, you go to these festivals and it's 90% white people with 90% of the participants on stage white. So how can you sit there? I mean, you got artists out here that's very qualified to play, but the shift is on, and it has been on. It's nothing new. I mean, it's not mind-boggling. I remember living in Mississippi. They said that the white people are stealing our music. And my question to them was, will you let me come in your house and steal a steak while you're sitting there watching TV? Can I go in your freezer and steal everything out and walk out and you don't say anything? Of course you wouldn't. So then don't say that they're stealing our music. They're incorporating our music into their lives, but they haven't stole anything. It's up to you to own it.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay, so now you're talking about the issue of borrowing versus stealing. How does that play out in the way of copyright laws? Do you think copyright laws have helped to avoid this stealing or borrowing of blues music, or has it presented a roadblock?
Depends on the artist. If you're an educated person in this business, it's good for you. Yeah. You have to be up on your music to see if somebody else out there else is using it.
Yeah,
go ahead. I'm
sorry.
But
no. I just think that certainly in the early days when a lot of the
uneducated,
they
had no choice.
They had no choice, and they were manipulated into signing away rights so that the way that the listing of the writers on the song were used against them, so that people were making a lot of money on the backs of the folks. I mean, it really was theft. It was stealing. And when you think about how many of the folks who really were creating the music, like in the same way we look at all the bebop artists, who changed everything. I mean, they were the bedrock. And when you think about that in the blues context, they were stolen from. They were shut out. As we get, I think now today's modern musician has learned a little bit from what's taken place in the past. And is a little bit more savvy about making sure that the rights and the contracts are taken care of. Of course, things change a great deal nowadays in that that there's this World Wide Web, and there's a lot of music that's just going out, and sometimes people's rights are protected when it's out there, sometimes it's not. But it's really changing very rapidly. When I remember hearing, because I love Led Zeppelin, right? I grew up, in college, my friends, we'd all listen to Led Zeppelin, and every now and then they say something positive about the source that they got. Those guys made a lot of money on this music, and I'm not saying that I still like them. I still love listening to what they do today, but they made a lot of money, appropriating stuff from African American artists. And when I remember when Chuck Berry passed away, I was astonished that none of the rock and rollers who always hold him up as the source of their artistry came to St. Louis to pay homage to him. When I think about how much they owe this man, especially somebody like Keith Richards, who, he's like, he sounds very much like a Chuck Berry clone in those early days. There's so much of his music that's in there, and you say, I know that they're busy guys, but if your father passed away, you wouldn't say, I'm too busy. You go, and that's the way that it should have been with Chuck Berry, in my humble opinion. There's been a lot of appropriation going on. I think that it's a fine line too, because I think that people, when you listen, you exist in this time period. You're listening to the sounds that are around you. You take your influences and you try to make your own artistic statement. You try to say try to do the best that you can to fuse all that into something that's honest and reflects who you are. The problem that comes is that is for a lot of people is that the folks that you're drawing those influences on have not been able to participate in the value that you are creating from them.
John, I've noticed that, you sort of a little bit laid back, but today when you're dealing with some of the artists that come to your venue, what's your take on the music that they're playing? Do they credit, the source? Do they talk about, how that music, is a part of their repertoire or what?
Oh, definitely. As I meet the different artists, they'll let me know who all their influences are, and sometimes you're listening to them, and it reminds me of somebody that I met years and years ago, and I'll remind them, but they didn't even know it. They'd just absorbed it, so I don't think they were stealing anything. Mm-hmm. They were emulating something that they had absorbed musically, and would also make sure that that they're treated with honor and respect to where they got their music. Essentially, what I don't normally deal with is people that have a rock star attitude. Okay. It's more the people that are stars here in their own town and perform, do a great show, and also write their own music. That's one of the things that is, I hope we can continue here in St. Louis right now, is bringing out more original material instead of regurgitating the same songs over and over and over. There's some stunning artists here, and because they have learned about how to make money in the music business, they're not even manufacturing records or anything anymore. So, following the royalties and the units sold and all those things, it's a lot harder, but you can also get to a much broader audience, as Dion said. And going to the internet, you can market yourself, you can make money, and not be trapped with having to be connected to the record company and the contracts that came along with it throughout. Most of the musicians that we have performing are actually, if they have a product, they're able to sell it, and they manufacture more products. But the main thing is to learn that recording someone else's music doesn't necessarily mean that you are an artist. It means that you're duplicating something that's already been done. And if you have a value, then it would probably be more relevant if it's something that is truly original. And in blues, there's not a whole lot that hasn't been revamped. It's just been absorbed. Some of the early traditional blues have been re-recorded in different versions. They're not necessarily a different style. It's just a different version that they didn't have a copy of anything to learn from. They just saw somebody in the town, and it was in them, and it came out a little different, and it wasn't exactly plagiarism, but it was really absorption of a music style. But what we have at the club more often than not is just making sure that that they're trying to be innovative in their own way, because each artist is different. So trying to duplicate something that's already been done doesn't really excite me. So that's the best version of the same song I've heard a million times by somebody else. But somebody that comes out and actually captures your attention because they have a quality about them that's definitely compelling and original, and that's what makes them unique. And that goes back to the uniqueness of what they do is where their value is. Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to go back on the other point, mm-hmm. that unfortunately, the people that should have or could have been the people that benefited the most out of blues, the majority of those original innovators, they're gone. Mm-hmm. if you didn't see them and feel them, you can listen to a record, but they're not going to get the benefit of what their true value was when they produced that thing. And that's why people really definitely need to have a sense of what you're paying for, that there is a uniqueness to artists, and then there's other artists that are basically just propping themselves up and posing as somebody who's an original art form. They're playing a music form, but they're not innovators, and they're not originals, and they're not unique. So when I'm looking at people and listening to people, that's essentially what I'm trying to make sure that they are treated with the respect that they deserve. If it isn't in money, then there's respect, and you try and bring money to them along with the respect. And that comes from a shared value system in music, and being able to, as a community, make those people feel that they are valuable. And along with that, the money will come. Maybe it won't, but they will be treated as if they are golden. And they're golden in the time that they're here right now.
Going back to copyrights, you know, that's why, I mean, I know people across the country who don't necessarily participate, but the National Blues Museum, the B.B. King Museum did also. We pay our license fees for BMI, CSAC. What's the other one?
ASCAP?
And ASCAP. Thanks. And ASCAP. So that's where it comes back to the education of the musicians themselves to follow through with their money, because I know artists who still getting royalties. It may not be a lot, but they're making money off of it. That's just one avenue. Then at the National Blues Museum, what we also do is we live stream all of our performances, because my hope, the museum's hope, is for somebody to see that artist, recognize them, and then book them to play either different venues or on different concerts, on different festivals. That's the goal of that right there. And so we've actually had people fly in from Alaska just to see Marquise Knox from our live stream. We've had people fly, another doctor fly in from Pittsburgh just to see Big George, and that's a St. Louis icon. And they flew all the way, he flew in just to see Big George and flew right back out. He just wanted to meet him and to see him perform live. So going back to the licenses and the copyrights, I think now with the internet, the younger generation is coming in, they see the faults of the forefathers, just trying to take care of their money, their songs, so they can be paid respectively now.
And so strange now, because you know there's been so much disruption within the music industry that the way people are making money is radically different than it was even 20 years ago. There used to be a time when I first started, there were several jazz labels that would send us materials, right? And they'd send posters out because they'd have some support behind so somebody would put out a record and then they would tour to help support that record. But now people are touring in hopes that people will start, downloading their music. So it's sort of flipped. So it's much different. It's much more challenging for people to make money in this environment. You make a lot of money if you're one of those handful of people that become superstars. But for the rest of for once you get sort of below a certain tier, it's really, really tough to make a living, because music has been commoditized. It's like you're going to pay the same. You're going to pay the same for any type of music. You're going to pay that 99 cents for or is it like $1.29 now for any song, no matter what you'd pay that for if Gene Dobbs Bradford puts out a song, versus somebody like B.B. King, it's the same thing. It's just, the same price, but it's not the same thing because he's much better.
He's an originator, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let's think and maybe talk about how can someone invest in blues music today without exploiting it?
I invest in it every day, mainly by just putting my money into having a venue that will support music and encourage them to be able to make a living out of it. And I myself am a musician, and we know how hard it can be. But you try and benefit from it as a business owner. We're definitely making money, but I'm not living in a mansion. I'm not driving a Cadillac. I'm just trying to survive in the business of music.
I am. I ain't exploiting it.
Yeah, that's it. What's going on? But when you're invested, you have to be real about it. Some people just treat it as a commodity, and they're not close to the people that they're dealing with. They're not talking to people in the language of music. It's about money. Well, we all need money, but you've got to be able to make sure that the people that you're working with are confident that if I do this for you, do you really care? And will we do it again? And if we did it again and it was good, it can only get better. It can't get worse. So looking at Jeremy and going backwards in time with the Blues Society and the festivals here, that was a creation of a group of people and a community that were completely invested, and they were working together, and everybody was trying to make money, but the main thing was to make it a success. And if success isn't necessarily measured in money, success is that we brought great St. Louis music and events. And at the same time, I'm going to tie this to Dion, because there was a time when the Blues Society was going to do the Blues Museum. So that was talked about for 20 years. And through time, we helped and got it to where he's taken it, and it exists. But then you look at it and say, okay, well, now that we've finally got what we've dreamed of, how many people in St. Louis have actually gone there to support it? I've invested in it. He's invested in it. The musicians have invested in it. The city, in some form, has, but the people, are they going out and investing in it? So if blues and the awareness of blues is based on having a venue to encourage people to invest in whatever way, shape, or form, whether it be business or sponsored dollars, donations of any kind, you have to be serious about it, and the people need to understand that this is it's a life of sorts, that you love blues. You don't like blues. You love blues, and you understand blues, and try and make sure that the people that are the true blues people are given the benefits and the residuals of what they deserve. And it's not always in money. So if you're invested, you help support them. You help make sure that people are aware that these people exist right here, right now, and they deserve to be able to be seen and to benefit financially, if that's what it is, or at least have the dignity of saying, I am a blues musician and I'm proud of it, and take that away.
I would go a little, thanks, John, and I would go and say, like in the NBA, LeBron can talk about Kobe, Kobe can talk about Michael Jordan can talk about Dr. J, and on and on and on. They know the history of their craft. So the way he's not exploited, I don't care who you are, know the history of the music that you're emulating, you want to perform, know the history of it. And I would advise everybody to take a deep trip down to the Mississippi Delta, Arkansas, anywhere in the Delta, regardless if it's Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and find out what those people went through. Understand what you're singing about. It came from within. It's not because of what you've heard and want to emulate. It's the lifestyle. Not only did they live back then, they're still living to this day that way. I can go down there, and I love Mississippi. I love it because that's where I got indoctrinated. So I didn't get it on this level right here. I got it on the grassroots level to not only hear the stories of Pine Top Perkins, Honey Boy Edwards, and the list goes on, to know that these artists would come and play for $35 for 3 hours and would not stop. And no copyrights. I know an artist right now in his late 70s who has never been paid, and he's wrote for Tyrone Davis. He's written for them all. But because of the system that they were brought in, they didn't know any better. So the question was, how can you perform it without exploiting it and support it? Support it by knowledge. Do your history, do some homework. So when you have artists like Marquise Knox out there making these comments, and I see all the hatred, and he thinks that people take it as a black-white issue, and it's not. He's stating a fact. Now, if you want to bring race into it, that's on you and something you need to deal with yourself, but he's making a fact. Mm-hmm. Know your history, and people take that, and automatically, because a black person is saying it, they want to turn that to the angry black man, and he's not. He's making a comment, making a factual statement, and it just goes off board. But if people but then he has his fan base. You have whites and blacks coming to his defense. I'm just using Marquise in this particular instance. Mm-hmm. But if you did your homework, go down there. Don't go to Clarksdale, which is a beautiful, economic, vibrant situation. Get down into Dodgeville. Mm-hmm. Hello. Go to Ruleville. Mm-hmm. Go to Indianola. Go to Natchez. Go to these towns and see and learn the history of what these blues musicians put in, lost, got killed for. The whole works, and then come singing. That's why it comes from the heart, and that's why it sounds so different when certain people sing it.
Okay. Let the truth be spoken. Speak.
Okay.
Okay.
So take that to the next step. Once you really familiarize yourself with that, is you have to be the evangelist. I mean, in St. Louis, one of the things that we talk about, and we still talk about to this day, is that when we started, what we wanted to do was we wanted to change the culture of the city so that they embrace jazz as much as they do the Cardinals or Ted Drew's ice cream or toasted ravioli. So you say when somebody comes to St. Louis, right? They're from out of town, says, "This is what we're all about. This is our thing." Right. This is what's great about our city, and being out there and like you say, when you have somebody who's coming to town, if you're not taking them to the blues museum, well, who's going to? We're not out there saying that St. Louis has a very special place in the history of the blues, in the history of jazz, even hip hop, rock and roll. Mm-hmm. St. Louis is a town that's all about music. But if all we say is, when you talk about St. Louis is, oh, we got the Cardinals and we got Ted Drew's and we got Forest Park, right? Somebody's got to be out there in that milieu saying that St. Louis is a town like no other when it comes to music and carrying that flag.
I was talking to a gentleman today from Cincinnati, and he ranks St. Louis number 3 behind Chicago and New Orleans when it comes to the live music scene. And I promise, when I got here, if Jeremy's still here, I told him shortly after I arrived, I have never seen a music scene like this right here. It is live, it is vibrant. Anything you want to hear, you can hear. And it's people like John May down there on Broadway. That was one of the things, is the museum in competition with the other blues establishments. Mm-hmm. No, we're here to support them and advertise. In the museum now, we list every venue that plays music, at least on Broadway. We direct them there, even over the Jeans Place. It's we're all in this thing together.
Before I toss this to our audience participants, there is one other concern that I know has come to my attention. That is, how do you all as venue, managers and people, with your business background, how do you reach out to get the immediate community more involved with what you're doing at your different establishments?
I'll shoot first on that one.
Okay.
We do it through outreach. So we do blues in the schools. the staff, for the most part, when we're out, I'm always wearing a National Blues Museum hat, logo, T-shirt, whatever. It's just a walking billboard. So I'm always stopping, and they'll ask, where is the National Blues Museum? You tell them, well, we didn't even know it was there. It's constant. You constantly have to be branding your organization. We started a radio show, and that radio show is doing very well, and that's just getting more popularity out there, getting more of the word out there. It's just a nonstop battle. You're always trying, because no matter, I lived in a town of 10,000 people at the B.B. King Museum. It was people in that community didn't know where it was at. It's just a constant battle. So you just constantly always trying to tell people about your establishment.
Oh, definitely. I know that one. I've been BB's for 22 years. And every once in a while, I get somebody who stumbled in on a door. They must have thought they were at the ballpark village. And they have a great time.
Right.
They have a great time. They go, I can't believe it. This is great. I don't know how come have you just, no, you've been meaning to get here for 22 years, you know. And, I guess if you were going to say blues, you'll say BB's, you know. I mean, you can get off plane at the airport and ask any cab driver, where can I hear some good music? And they'll say, BB's. Why? Because BB's has live music 7 nights a week, and it's always going to be good. So that's what we're doing, but we're not advertising like they do with sports. We're not advertising with billboards or anything. We're doing it like blues. We're down in the roots and, just share it. But we should be broadcasting around the world like you are, but it's a word of mouth. Now there's people that are not coming downtown because they have an impression that it's dangerous down there. It's dangerous out in the county, people, man. They're everywhere.
It's dangerous in St. Charles.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's, but if you fall into that, and the media here will convince you that, like last night we had one of the best boogie woogie piano players on the planet playing there, but the weather's bad. It's downtown. And everything you could imagine, except, hey, I really want to go out and really enjoy some great music in a great place in the Mardi Gras season. That's why I'm a little laid back. I just had a great Mardi Gras myself. But, you have to participate in it. So it's a constant mantra. It really is. As Dion said, I don't think I have any clothes that are not BB's, and everybody knows me as, it's the blues guy, with the beret. But as you try and do this as a venue, you constantly are trying to find a way to reach those people that say they really like the blues. They say they meant to get down there, just like the museum. And I have that all the time when people ask me, how have you been there? What do you think? And I might just turn it around and go, well, have you been there?
Right.
You know what? You're taking the shortcut.
Right.
There's not an app for that. You got to go there and experience, and then tell us what you think, because now you're invested in it. You actually were drawn out. You have an opinion, and you can share it with other people. And that's how I feel every day when I open my doors. I'm hoping that somebody comes in here and has a great time, and it's a memory that they share with other people, whether it be, in their community or internationally, but to make sure that they participate in what it is that we're doing, and that in itself will make everything grow. And to tie each other, he plays blues on my stage, I play blues on his stage. We hang out together because we are music. And we support it in every way, shape, and form. And the people that say they like music, particularly blues music, don't buy a record. Go support live music, because it's happening right here, right now. But if you go back to the digital things, I got to say this only because R.L. Burnside told me one time, he goes, man, John, I made more money off that one song. And he hated that song. He hated that song, but he made more money on that song than he did on all of the recordings that he'd done his entire life. And that's a stunning thought, but at least he had the copyright and got the royalties off that song.
You know, I think that you know, building up an institution or really having a venue, it's actually it's really simple. It's very simple. It's not easy, but it's simple, and I think it boils down to two things. And the first is something that I think that both of these gentlemen do very well, is that you have to have excellent programming, right? You have to have the best that you can get. And you have to make sure that if you have educational programs, that they're effective. And then the second thing that you have to do once you have that excellent programming is you just have to let people know that it's there. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. I think that as John is saying, it doesn't have to be a big investment in taking out a full page ad in the Post-Dispatch or the New York Times or something to say, we have great music here. It's like making sure that people come in and letting those people be your ambassadors going out, and the experience that you have, at a place like BB's is the kind that you go out and you do talk to people about, throughout. So that's what we try to do, and that's one of the things that I think has helped. But we can't be bashful about getting that word out, and we have to really say and sort of have a little bit of swagger when we talk about about the blues here in St. Louis, because we have a great scene, and we should not only be proud of it, we should be out being ambassadors for that and saying that what we have here is really remarkable, and so let's celebrate that.